Welcome back to another spill drop video. Today I'm going to show you the evolution of my compact rocket factory. What you see right here is version 1 of the rocket factory, relatively compact in a 3x1 footprint and almost fully self-sufficient. However, there were some things that I wanted to change about this design, so I decided to completely overhaul the concept and come up with something a little bit different. And here we have the footprint for the factory, except that in this version, you'll only need a 2x1. This little area here you can use as a heli garage, or you can cut it off entirely. I just wanted this to be symmetrical with my last design that you can see over there, so that's why I kind of expanded it into a 1x3. Through this door, we can get a look at what we're starting with. We have 2 input barrels here with a hopper for quick depositing of raw materials. We have 8 electric furnaces on the shelf as well. We have a medium battery that powers this full system with quite a lot of power left over. We have 4 low-grade based furnaces in the back, including 3 that are in a triangle honeycomb behind this first furnace here next to the battery. And if we go on in, you can see that we've got our tier 2 and tier 3 workbenches. We've got 4 auto crafters in this design, 5 small boxes for storage, and 2 of these wall cabinets for additional storage up top. As you can see, this design is quite compact and a little bit more complicated than I would necessarily recommend for somebody who's trying to build this out for themselves. But I really liked the aesthetic of this design, so I wanted to show you how I would probably lay this out in my own base, including with these wall cabinets, which I've sort of struggled to find a good use for, and seem to actually provide quite a good bit of utility in these really narrow spaces. So this is kind of how I would do it, but I definitely recommend you experiment a little bit more with this design on a build server and find something that fits your needs and your aesthetic rather than just going with what I've designed here. Now, these boxes down below are going to be the collectors for raw materials that are ready to be crafted into our tier 3 recipes, and these wall cabinets are going to be storage for the rockets that are ultimately crafted on this upper auto crafter here on top of the tier 3. This design is fed from a medium battery, and this node here shows all of the extra power that is left over, 13 rust watts per minute from the initial 50 coming out of the medium battery. So ultimately, this is a fairly efficient system, a relatively low cost factory, though it will require probably a bit more than a couple of solar panels if you want this running day and night. One of the primary obstacles was that I wanted my tier 3 workbench to craft rockets, pipes, and explosives. I experimented with a couple of different designs to make this work and then settled on a much simpler but slightly less dynamic system. So to start, I'm going to explain what we're looking at. We have a raw materials input barrel. So this is going to take scrap and high quality metal, low grade fuel, sulfur, gunpowder, and metal fragments. And that red pipe that you see funnels those ingredients into the conveyor just above the barrel to the left of the workbench. The red pipe coming out of that conveyor funnels down into the auto crafter. The yellow pipe leaving the auto crafter goes into this conveyor here on the right, and then out into the output barrel that you see on the right hand side here. These other 2 conveyors on the left hand side of the workbench are going to take blueprints from this small box down below the workbench and funnel them into the blueprint in port on the auto crafter. This magenta pipe that you see next to the violet pipe in the blueprint out port for the auto crafter funnels blueprints into these 2 conveyors on the far right that then drop those blueprints back down into this small box. The remaining 2 conveyors on this design over here to the right of the workbench are the sensors. These two conveyors connect back to the input barrel via this yellow pipe down along the floor, and they determine whether or not the ingredients needed for pipes or explosives exist in the input barrel. If those materials are in that barrel for either of those recipes, the filter pass node on these two conveyors is triggered on, turning on one or both of these conveyors on the far left. If any ingredients are missing for either of those two recipes, the filter fail node on those conveyors will trigger on, respective to which recipe is missing ingredients, turning on these conveyors on the far right, which will remove those blueprints from the auto crafter according to which ingredients are still needed. Suffice to say, this is a very complicated system. One drawback to this design is that if you run out of any ingredients for these recipes in that barrel, these conveyors will pull those blueprints out of the auto crafter even if there are sufficient ingredients in the auto crafter to make that recipe. For the second iteration of this design, we have an input barrel on the left and an output barrel on the right. This red pipe that you see down below is still going to be the primary input for the auto crafter through these two conveyors that you see here, respective to the recipe that they are assigned. On the left, we will have pipes, and on the right, we will have explosives. That'll be the case with all of these conveyors, and these two conveyors are then combined again before they go into the auto crafter. This yellow pipe, of course, leaves the auto crafter into a conveyor here on the right side, which then outputs pipes and explosives into this barrel on the right side. Similarly to the last design, these two conveyors on the very far left are going to be the blueprint in conveyors, depositing blueprints through this violet pipe from the small box down below. And this magenta pipe is going to take blueprints from the blueprint out port on the auto crafter and deposit them through these two conveyors on the far right side back into the small box down below. The two conveyors at the very top of this system are the sensor conveyors, checking what is in the input barrel to determine whether or not to turn on the blueprint in conveyors or the blueprint out conveyors, based on which ingredients are currently in the input barrel. The variation in this design is having two separate conveyors for raw materials, which can better allow you to control the input of raw materials into this primary auto crafter, allowing recipes which are longer than the 5 crafting slots in the auto crafter to compete better and allow for an even distribution of materials for both recipes. But again, this design was a little bit more complicated than what I wanted to build in my final version, and still didn't solve the problems that I had. So what I settled for was this much simpler design that does away entirely with the sensor conveyors and swapping in or out the blueprints for the auto crafter. For this much simpler design on the far left, we've got our input barrel, which takes raw materials into the two separate conveyors up here for the two respective recipes that we're working with. These conveyors outputs are then combined into the auto crafter and then output into a splitter for routing through the base or into the additional auto crafter on top of the workbench later on, and into a conveyor for storage in the output barrel. This design is much simpler, obviously, and is a little bit more limited in how it functions compared to the other designs. For now, this is my recommended layout for a 2-craft auto crafter design. Now that you've seen my conceptual build for this module, let's go ahead and get into the build tutorial of this process, where I show you how to lay out all the pieces and get this set up in a slightly simpler layout. To start, we're going to go ahead and get our foundations laid for this design and get some walls placed around these. And just like that, you have basically the entire footprint that you're going to need for this design. You can include the prison cell gate that I used on my concept build, but it kind of gets in the way a little bit, so I'm not going to include it here. But you are going to want to add a triangular floor frame here. Once you got to this stage, you can go ahead and get everything up to wood. Be upgrading stuff to stone selectively as we go. Leave this frame twig. It'll make placing these furnaces a little bit easier. It's a good idea to get your adapters on and piped in at this stage, because everything will still be pretty accessible here. And I recommend connecting the inputs and outputs for these furnaces to a combiner, which you can place up here temporarily. Now for the shelf placement, I'm going to show you something else that I've recently discovered that makes just no sense to me at all. It can kind of make or break some of the features of this build. Seems a little dramatic, but you'll see what I mean. For this design, we want to put a shelf in, and on this shelf, we're going to have two vertical barrels and a hopper in between them to kind of act as a hidden deposit tool. Now, you're going to just put your shelf in here. You can snap it or you can freehand place it, whatever works for you. Before we put the furnaces in, I want to show you what I'm talking about. We'll put a barrel right here, about where the bottom barrel should be, and we'll put a barrel up here where it should be on the top. Now you'll notice that it's being blocked by the wall frame. Typically this will happen because the wall frame is a little bit bigger than it needs to be to allow the barrel to fit, and a smaller hitbox on the wall frame will resolve that issue. So if we switch it to the sheet metal, it should be slightly smaller, just small enough to allow for this barrel to place. But as you can see, that's not happening. Now, taking a look at this design here, you can see that we clearly fit this barrel and this barrel on top of a shelf. So it kind of makes no sense that we wouldn't be able to place a second barrel on top of this lower barrel here. But if you take a look at it from up above, you can kind of see what's happening here. There's that little bit of overlap there, and that's blocking it from being placed. That's a little bit odd. But what I discovered is if you upgrade this foundation to stone, remove your shelf, and place a new one, you can place a lower vertical barrel here and a second vertical barrel on top with no issue at all. And you can see there's even a decent amount of clearance there, where previously there was none. Doesn't really make a lot of sense to me why different foundations would change the placement height for, I'm assuming, this shelf, but that seems to be the case. So I don't know why that's happening, but that seems to be the way things are working right now. So keep in mind, despite all of the other cool textures that we've got now, this is still the ultimate texture for making placements. Default stone. Now let's go ahead and get our furnaces in place, and then we'll get our barrels set up as well. And as you go, I recommend getting your furnaces wired in. It's easier to do this sooner rather than later. Place your splitters up here where they're nice and out of the way. And if you want to include the hidden hopper trick that I used on the concept model, you're going to want to use these frontier barrels. For some reason, the hopper can snap easily onto the frontier barrels, even through the shelf, and it passes through the bottom of the frontier barrel up top. I'm not sure why that is, but that's just how it works. Now that we've got everything kind of set up, we can go ahead and finish out this first room. We're going to want to get another low-grade based furnace placed right in here up against the window. And our medium battery as close to that as we can get it. Should still have plenty of room to navigate here. I mean, plenty of room. A little bit of room anyway. Place an adapter there. And I recommend placing an igniter somewhere in this window where it can access all 4 of these furnaces. That'll make things a little bit easier down the line because you'll have that access to a quick ignition source for all of these furnaces. And if you want this module to be fully self-contained and you're going to have the rockets piped somewhere else, you can even have the button to ignite those furnaces somewhere out here. That way you don't even have to go in here to get it started. Now, how you do the color of your pipes really varies on what you're trying to accomplish. In my concept, I went from this red, which I usually indicate as raw or input, and then at the splitter, I changed them out to orange, which, as you can kind of tell, doesn't really make much of a visual difference there, but it's a little easier to follow. And then I kind of go with the Roy G. Biv process all the way throughout. I'm going to go ahead and just get to the sort of final portion of that, and the rest of the pipes along the way, you can kind of change to the color you need. Alright, to clarify what we've just done here, we've taken the raw input from these 2 barrels, funneled them into this splitter. We're going to have the ore and wood output into this conveyor, which will then be split between the electric furnaces and the low-grade based furnaces. This additional output from the input barrel will take any materials that do not need to be smelted into this combiner over here, which will then go into a separate conveyor into the second phase, which will be this room here for crafting. Since there are a number of different outputs for the crafting phase, we're going to split this combiner into a splitter. Might seem a little counterintuitive, but ultimately what we want to make sure we're doing is taking material that needs to be smelted, smelting it first, and then routing it back into the collective materials for crafting. And any materials that have already been smelted or who don't require smelting will simply bypass the furnaces into this combiner, which then pumps them into this splitter. Let's go ahead and get this section upgraded to stone as well. We'll flip these 2 walls to the hard side in, and we'll get our workbenches placed as tight up against these corners as we can get, and then up against each other in a nice, orderly, and compact fashion. Alright, I think that's about as good as it gets. You can still navigate through here pretty easily. Not perfect, but it's pretty dang good. Now, to further simplify things, I'm going to put just 2 barrels in this room here. Okay, that's crazy. How is that being blocked by the window? You gotta be kidding me right now. That's actually unreal. I don't understand how it can be blocked by the window all the way over here. Make that make sense? We're gonna go ahead and just not snap it and place it freehand. The reason I didn't use barrels in the last design is it does make it a little bit harder to navigate, but they do kind of illustrate this process a little bit more easily. Now we're getting into the crafting portion of today's programming. So let's get our auto crafters placed. Fabulous. And we're going to get another splitter placed as well. I'm going to take 1 pipe out of this splitter to see above the window. and into this splitter. This splitter here is going to feed our tier 2 crafters. So we're going to need 3 conveyors because we're going to be making gunpowder on both of these crafters and low grade fuel on just one of them. So we'll start with the first 2 conveyors here and here, and the third conveyor right over here. These 2 conveyors are going to join together in a combiner and then be funneled into this auto crafter down below. And this conveyor here is just going to feed straight into this auto crafter on top of the tier 2. It's already looking a little bit messy, but trust the vision, we'll get there eventually. At this point, you can add a small box down below the tier 2 if you like, kind of squeeze it in wherever is convenient, and get an adapter on the front. Then you're going to want to use a combiner to take the combined outputs from these 2 conveyors, as well as from the original input barrel, and connect them down into this small box below the tier 2. This combiner needs a conveyor in order to function the way that it should, so we're going to put a conveyor down here that deposits all of this material that we need into this small box and into this barrel here. Optionally, you can add an additional combiner between this small box here and this barrel here to take the crafted output from the first auto crafter on the tier 3, making pipes and explosives, so that those extra pipes and explosives that aren't being used to craft rockets can go straight into one of these barrels here. But we're going to bypass that today, as it's unlikely that you're going to be having this thing running to the point where you're going to be absolutely overloading this top crafter here if you don't have the other materials you're looking for. But just keep that additional combiner in mind. Now we're going to take all of the materials for crafting pipes and explosives and ultimately rockets from that small box down there and this barrel right here and funnel them into the auto crafters on the tier 3. To do that, we're going to need a splitter. And this splitter goes into 2 conveyors right here, which will then, you guessed it, feed back into a combiner. This combiner is going to go to the first auto crafter on the tier 3 workbench, as shown. For the output of the tier 3 on the concept, I had the output going into a splitter that was placed on the back of the tier 3, which doesn't work here, I think because I don't have that prison cell wall providing extra stability for the workbench, but that was tying into the additional combiner that I had on that module. This system is a little bit simpler, so I'm just going to take the output for this auto crafter and funnel it in to our upper auto crafter here through a combiner. We're going to take our additional third output from this splitter here, and we're going to run it into this combiner as well. And this combiner will output into a conveyor, which will then feed into the auto crafter on the top of the tier 3 workbench to craft the rockets. You can add an additional combiner here if you think you're going to have rockets coming from your initial input barrels. You can take this extra output from that splitter and run it straight into a combiner into your final conveyor, just in case you depot any rockets straight away. But as that's kind of unlikely for you to depot rockets into your rocket factory, we're just going to run this straight into our conveyor and then into our rocket barrel. And now that we've got everything piped together, we're going to want to get the electrical grid set up for the rest of the module and then get it all plugged in. So I recommend starting from kind of the back and working your way forward. That way all your connectors are ready to go and you can kind of figure out what you need to place and where. And to do that, we're going to need a few branches. And then you can tie these branches into the pass-through node on one of your conveyors. And then link all of your conveyors together for kind of an easy way to get a decent power circuit set up. Alright, so for the branches coming off the battery, we've got the first branch out going to this chain here, outputting 32 rust watts per minute. That's 9 for each of these first two splitters, and then 14 off of this branch here, which will be the combined output for the 6 rust watts per minute on the last splitter and the 8 required for the hopper. All the rest of the power is going into our conveyors. As you can see, everything else is getting power in here. Turn all these guys on, and they should be happy little clams. Let's go ahead and see just how much we're dealing with here. Alright, so if you take a look at that, the active usage on this circuit is 36 rust watts per minute, 50 total, so you've got a little bit left over that you can use for other circuits if you need to. And before I forget, we are going to want to get our button wired in as well. Let's go ahead and get that switched over here. Beautiful. Gets all our furnaces ignited. Now let's get our conveyor filters set up. For the first conveyor, we're going to want to get our furnace inputs going. Perfect. Then of course, we're going to need to get the conveyors set up for the tier 2. For the lower level tier 2 auto crafter, we're going to want to craft our low grade fuel. So we need animal fat and cloth. 3 to 1. 3 to 1. Alright, so we'll save that. And for the other filter on the lower level tier 2 auto crafter, we're going to want to create a gunpowder filter. So we're going to want sulfur and charcoal. And for our upper level tier 2 auto crafter, we're going to want to just do the gunpowder. And this conveyor here is going to be pulling from not just the furnaces and these auto crafters here, but also from the initial input barrel. So we're going to want to make sure that every possible crafting item or crafted item that is needed for making rockets is coming through this filter. All right, that looks pretty good. I would set a maximum amount for sulfur, so it's not pulling all of the sulfur out of your crafting for the tier 2s. So I would set just a, sort of light 2000 or so max on that, but you can kind of tinker with that as need be. Now for your tier 3 conveyors on the lower level, you're going to want your scrap and your high quality metal. We're going to want 20 and 20 and 2 and 2. So what this is going to do is it's not going to occupy a space in the auto crafter unless the exact amount that we need is in storage, and it's only going to put the exact amount we need in the crafter. We're going to have this set for any item as well. And for the explosive auto crafter, we're going to want 50 and 50. 10 and 10, 10 and 10, and 3 and 3. And then of course for the rockets, we're going to want 150 and 150, pipes, 2 and 2, and our explosives, 10 and 10. Excellent. And last but not least, we want our rockets coming out of the crafter and into our rocket storage barrel. Go ahead and get your blueprints placed. Get your auto crafters turned on. Now let's go ahead and see how well this all works. So I've got some materials here that we can use to get the ball rolling. Should be everything that we need. All right, looks like some of the already prepared materials are making their way in here. This auto crafter is making looks like low grade fuel for the most part right now. It can be wise to set limits on these filters as well, so a max of say 1,000 and 1,000 on those, just so they don't fill up the auto crafter unnecessarily. Making gunpowder and low grade, which is awesome. This one is doing some work as well. The gunpowder is always going to be the slow part of this process, so you want to make sure that your gunpowder is going as quick as you can. Auto crafting it on a tier 2 is maybe not the most efficient way to get gunpowder. I'd recommend using a mixing table to make it, but if you want a fully hands-off system where you can go out and farm and just let the machines do all the work, for now this is the best way to do it. And there you see it, crafting the pipes. And if we take a look up here, you can see everything's getting funneled in. In just a second, this top auto crafter is going to make its very first rocket. Beautiful. And that rocket gets deposited right in here. Not too bad. And that's all that I have for you today. The Compact Rocket Factory version 2. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like down below. If you have any comments about how I can do this differently or what you want to see in my next video, leave those in the comments section. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more stuff like this, consider subscribing to the Spill Drop channel. If you want to help boost this video for free after you've liked the video down below, use that hype button on your mobile device to give me a little bit of a boost in the algorithm. It means more than you can imagine at helping these videos get discovered. Thank you again for watching. This has been your friend Spill Drop, and I will catch you in the next one.